Another episode of the most authentic but nuanced holistic health and fitness podcast hosted by your favorite crunchy strength and conditioning coach. I'm Kelsey Moore, and today we are talking about my 50-mile trail race that I completed, and I have so much to say about it. And I'm calling this podcast 50 Unhinged Miles. And I didn't want to just get on the podcast and then just completely blast the race, because if you follow me on Instagram at all, then you understand that there were definitely some frustrating points to the race. But I'm probably 3 weeks out from running it now, and I feel so much better about it. And I want to walk you guys through the race in my mindset the entire time. So yeah, we're just gonna kick it off, go right into it. In the next couple of weeks, I hope to have a couple more really cool guests on, so you guys can be ready for that. But okay, so this 50-mile race, you guys know I've been training for about 6 months. I was looking at my Garmin watch and I was looking on my Strava, and I actually had ran almost 500 miles leading up to this race, which is just astonishing. And honestly, to be completely truthful, I don't feel like I look any different in regards to my body composition. And that wasn't necessarily ever the goal. I never had any intention of changing my body composition, but I was really curious on how that would impact it in the long run. Like, would I get really lean? When I trained for my half Ironman, I felt like I actually gained a lot of weight, but I think I was mismanaging some of my carbohydrate loading during that phase of training. And so I was just curious what I was going to learn and change for this go round. And honestly, from the outside, I feel like I don't look any different. My pants definitely fit a little differently. My thighs are a little bit tighter and my feels like a little bit looser. So that's always like a good feeling for everybody. But that definitely wasn't my first intention. I was just kind of curious. But I ran almost 500 miles and I'm the same pant size. So I think that just kind of speaks to I had so many other positive things come out of this training, which I'll talk about throughout this, podcast. And a couple of those, just going off of things that maybe a doctor would look for would be like my resting heart rate is down 10 to 15 beats. My blood pressure when I went to the doctors was actually 90 over 60. And they were when I had to go get my physical for the Army, my annual physical I have to do, they were like, are you, do you train for something? Are you sick? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, I'm actually in a big running phase right now. So that's why my blood pressure is really low. And so that's really positive. My sleep is really good. I'm eating a lot of food. I'm probably averaging about 2,100 calories right now. So sitting at about 180 grams of carbs on an average day, 150 grams of protein, and about 85 grams of fat. During my biggest, longest training days, my carbohydrates probably got up to 300 or 400 grams of carbohydrates, including the intra workout fueling that I was getting from spring energy gels and crackers and bananas and fruits and different things that I was eating to train for that training session. So yeah, I'm averaging probably about 180 grams of carbs, 150 grams of protein, which is a little bit over one. It's about 1.25 times my body weight. And then 85 grams of fat, I feel like I'm sitting really healthily with. Another interesting point is, I do talk about menstrual cycles pretty often because it is considered your sixth vital sign or your fifth vital sign or whatever it is, And I was very curious. I don't have a particularly super lean body fat percentage. I never really have. There was definitely a point in my life where I was definitely very thin. My frame was very thin. And I look back on even running track in college, I didn't feel like I had hips, where now I definitely feel like I have a little bit more curve to me. So I've never really had a super lean body composition. And in college, I had some menstrual cycle irregularities, I think, from being pretty thin or just kind of running a ton and not knowing how to properly feel my body. But I was curious how my menstrual cycle was really going to be affected or not affected by a lot of the running and training that I was doing. And I can honestly tell you that I was sitting around probably between 35 and 40 days before my training started. But it was pretty consistent at day 37, I would say. So it wasn't alarming to me. I definitely felt like I was ovulating at the correct point during the month. And I had the fluctuations in temperature, as if you're familiar with the fertility awareness method. So I felt like it was fine. I definitely on the bleeding days, definitely had some backaches and a lot of cramping. But nothing that I needed to like be super concerned about, but I definitely had to take Tylenol. So that was like before my training. But during my training now, my last menstrual cycle was very easygoing. I bled for only probably like 2 days. It was very minimal and very minimal backache and like only one day of very little cramping. I don't even think I had to take Tylenol this time around. So I feel like it definitely helped my symptomology. And I'm actually in the middle of reading Real Food for Fertility right now, written by Lily Nichols. I believe that's her name. She's a registered dietitian. And she talks about how when you become more efficient using your carbohydrates, which have become more efficient using my carbohydrates through my running and through my training, you'll actually have less PMS symptoms. And I can say anecdotally that is very much how I feel. There was not like I never missed a period. I never like didn't well, I missed period. I didn't do any of that. I definitely was very regular. I didn't feel like I had a lot of mood swings, and I think that is pointing to my very strict nutrition plan that I truly really tried to stick to. So that's kind of wraps up the things that I had felt like I even though I don't feel like my body composition changed a whole lot just based on like looking differently or how my clothes are fitting differently. I don't feel like I've had those big changes, but definitely like lower resting heart rate, lower blood pressure, better sleep, better menstrual cycle regularities. Yeah. So I think that's just like really cool to maybe tune into quickly. But yeah, so let's recap. So I did a 50K buildup in February. That was my first one here in North Carolina. I did a podcast episode on that one previously, and it went really well. It took me 8 hours and 42 minutes, and that was exciting for me because that was like my first bigger race recently in my life that I kind of got under my belt, and I felt like I learned a lot from my race plan. Kind of got like the jitters out of me just feeling nervous about ultra racing. And again, let me always clarify, I'm not racing anybody. Like these are all for completion and just for a challenge of myself. And I've said from the very beginning, like I want to learn how to carve out more time in my schedule so I can do the things that I love. And that's like the margin in my life. Like if I want to spend more time with my family, like I need to be so aggressive at carving out that time. And if I want to spend time out in the woods, then I need to aggressively carve out that time. And for now, that was through going through a big training plan. And now that I'm past my 50 miler, I hope to continue to keep those margins in my life, to keep going out to the trail and keep working on extra time in my afternoons, carving out, for things that I love and hobbies and blah, blah, blah. So definitely felt like I achieved that within my first 50K in February. And then I had my second 50K in March, which was a much harder 50K, but I ran it so well. I was so proud of my finish. And I was so aggressive on that race, and it had so much elevation gain. I think it was like, 7,500 feet of elevation. And yeah, it just went really well. I was so happy with it. And then I had about 4 weeks, and then I had my 50 miler. And when I was getting ready to sign up for a 50 miler, I originally had a 50 miler in mind in Virginia in April that I actually kind of boofed and did not sign up for it in time. I knew it was going to be a good 50 miler, and I was like kind of, to be honest, like banking on George, my running coach, to kind of give me the green light, like, hey, yes, we can train you up for this, or no, I don't think that we have enough time to lay a foundation to get you trained up for this. So I just was kind of like miscommunicating with him on it, and I missed that race that I wanted originally filled up. So I was really bummed about it. I shared a little bit on my Instagram when that happened. I think that was like in December or something. So that was a bummer, but I found this 50 miler. It was the Hydrating Humanity 50 miler. Clean. It was basically a 50 miler that was ran by a company called Hydrating Humanity, and they were collecting money to build wells in East Africa. And it was obviously a Christian organization. And I think I didn't share any of that on Instagram because I didn't feel like I needed to blast them. But I feel like the people that listen to my podcast are like a much more like niched audience that like actually want the details of everything in long form version. So yeah, so I think originally I was excited to be aligned with a group who I shared similar values with in regards to like sharing the love of Jesus through some type of humanitarian aid, thing that they were passionate about. They had 100-miler option on the sign up. So I was like, okay, these people are prepared to put on a 100-mile race. Like, this looks like a solid race to sign up for. So I signed up for this race it was in January. I think it was the first week of January. And the first thing I kind of noticed was I honestly didn't get a lot of information from them leading up to the race. Most of the time when you sign up for a race, especially on all trails, you will get an email from the race director like weeks out ahead of time, maybe a couple months out ahead of time, giving you the stats on the race or what you can expect for the race or what's going to be at the aid station, or here's the Strava link, or here's the All Trails link, and this is what you can expect for elevation gain. This is what you can expect for pacing and your drop bags and where your crew can be. And I did start to notice leading up to the race, I was not getting any of those emails. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm the newbie out here and, I just had been running in easier races. So I didn't, need this information or whatever. I didn't honestly really think anything of it. So we get there Friday night, and they said you could camp out on the lawn, which is like fairly traditional with ultra races. You can camp the night before. So we went out there, me, my husband, and the dog camped, and my husband and the dog camped in the tent, and then I actually ended up camping in the car because I didn't want to be like distracted by them with my like sleep routine and everything. So we ended up getting like a car mattress, and I slept in the car. It was a little buggy, but like generally, like the race didn't start till 9 a.m. the next morning. So I got a ton of sleep. I think I got like 8 or 9 hours of sleep. I had, the little single burner ready to go with my oatmeal in the morning. We had coffees ready. And I was generally like really, really excited. I will say, kind of coming off of the Terrapin Mountain 50K, the one that I just like crushed and felt super good about, I definitely battled a little bit more with like lack of motivation heading into my 50 miler, just because I had come off such a good high with Terrapin Mountain. And so that's when it kind of hit me like, oh, this was just kind of a stepping stone. Like, the goal wasn't just to crush Terrapin Mountain. My goal was to go to a 50 miler. And so I was already kind of battling like a little bit of lack of motivation, but I did all of my training runs. I did all of my training sessions in the weight room, and I don't feel like I missed anything major. And so I was generally like pretty excited for it. I knew I could do it. But another thing that I started noticing was normally when you camp at the trailhead like the night before, it's usually pretty busy. And when I got there, I noticed like there was not a lot of people out there, and there's probably only like 5 or 6 people camping the night before. And I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, usually it's pretty busy. So woke up the next morning feeling pretty good. The grass was like super wet. And so one big boof on my part was it wasn't my like primary running shoes that got soaked like wet from the dew on the grass, but it was definitely my secondary pair. And my feet were just like wet all morning. And in the back of my head, I was like, oh, it's okay because I have my other shoes. Like, my primary shoes are dry. But honestly, like, my skin had gotten a little bit soft on the bottom of my feet when I started running. And that kind of became a problem around mile like 13. My feet started to hurt a little bit. And I was like, dang it, that was such a stupid thing on my part. I should have been drying out my feet and like just sitting down all morning. Like, I didn't need to be walking around in the dewy grass. So that was like kind of a boof on my part that I definitely like learned from, which in the long run is like an easy fix. So not a big deal. So we started the race, and we kind of like all gathered at the pavilion. It was like a main like chapel area that was like an outdoor chapel area. And honestly, what I can describe it as is like go to a normal like Christian camp. Actually, this race was being held at a YMCA camp, which is obviously like a Christian camp. Like, the YMCA is a Christian organization generally, And there was like a huge chapel, and that was like where our main aid station was. And we all kind of gathered up, and they told us about the charity, and they told us about like the, hydrating humanity and what they were all about. And we prayed all together ahead of time. And there were probably about 20 racers, which is like literally the smallest race I've ever ran in. And so at first I was like, you know what? I don't need to like get in my head about this. I'm just going to run the race that I'm here to run. And so we prayed ahead of time, and I was like, okay, this is actually like legitimately like a really good Christian organization. The people there were very nice, very kind. And so I was excited, and we started and we went off, and there was a 4 mile loop and then a 9 mile loop. Now, the 4 mile loop, and you would do each of those, like you do the 4 and then the 9, and then come back to like the main chapel aid station. And that was considered one whole loop. And I had to do 4 whole loops, which was 13 miles total in one loop. So we go through and I go do the 4 mile loop, which is around the lake. And it was fairly like, well marked for the most part, fairly flat, like not a lot of climbing, beautiful scenery because you're just literally looping around a lake, and it was 4 miles. So took me like less than an hour the first time. So at the hour mark, you kind of loop back around to the chapel. You don't actually have to go back up into the chapel. But I was like really trying to be strict with my fueling plan, which was pretty much one spring energy gel, which was 45 grams of carbs every hour on the hour. And I was anticipating taking in about 15 of those because I knew the race would take me about 15 hours. And that was like gonna be my baseline. And then every hour for fluids, it was going to be 500 mil of fluids with a 25-gram scoop of Tailwind, which had more carbohydrates, 25 grams of carbs, 100 calories in there. So every hour I was consuming about 70 grams of carbs and 500 mils of water that also included electrolytes. So it was a lot, and I really needed to stay on top of that plan. So that first hour goes by, did the lake loop, and then I was ready to go out for my first 9 mile loop. And this is kind of where things started to get interesting because I started climbing, which this part of the race started to get very difficult. And I started noticing that the trails were not cleared like at all, which isn't necessarily like needed per se. But normally if it's a bigger race, they go out ahead of time and they kind of start clearing the brush, and they, chop down some, branches that had fallen on the trail, or they clear out some of the thorn bushes so you're not just kind of getting destroyed up on like these big ridge lines or whatever. And I started noticing that like it really wasn't cleared out. And I got to the top of the ridge line and I saw one of the contestants running towards me. And we both looked at each other and we went, oh no, because that means that one of us is running the wrong direction or we're in the wrong spot. So we stood there together and we both immediately were like, okay, well, we don't have an All Trails link. We don't have a Strava link. We don't have a paper map. We can only make our best guesses on like where we are. And so we stood there for like 5 minutes, talked back and forth about like, hey, did you hit this spot? Did you hit this spot? Blah, blah, blah. And I could tell like she was a little agitated, and I was certainly a little agitated because at that point it was super hot. It was like 80 degrees and so humid, which was something I definitely did not anticipate. I had been running so hard throughout the winter, and then I get to my hardest race and it's like 80 degrees and so muggy with like no wind. So that was already like, okay, I'm going to have to battle some of the heat today. And so I'm talking to her, and she again was expressing like a little agitation, and we were both like, okay, let's just keep going the directions that we had planned, and we'll see each other if we make it back to the chapel. So I passed her and then kept going on the 9 mile loop and started noticing that we kind of like left a trail like on the ground, and we started going up like a section of the ridgeline that was like very steep, but definitely was not an actual trail. Like it was like bushwhacking, basically. It was super thick brush. And they did say that they were going to mark the trail with these pink tags. And, there were some sections that I went like a mile or a mile and a half with no pink tag. And that was obviously a little concerning because I was like, well, if you're out here by yourself and you don't have any backup navigation, you're pretty much banking on them, like, the race organization, making it very clear, like where you're supposed to go. So that was a little bit annoying, but once I hit another pink tag, I was like, okay, I'm generally going the right way. So I get up to this section of the ridgeline, and the pink tags were probably like 30 yards apart. But when you're in thick brush, like that is just so, like it's not close enough. Like you need those tags to be like 15 to 20 yards apart. And so, I kind of made my way up on the ridgeline. And that was when I first encountered like somebody from the race organization up there. And they're like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, good. I was like, hey, just so you know, like I met a girl, like she's going the wrong direction, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, okay. Like, that's good to know. and kind of made it down that section, a super aggressive decline after seeing him. And so I was like, oh man, my knees are starting to talk to me a little bit. Made it to an aid station. And at this point, I was like starting to get like my feelers up, I would say. I definitely started to be like, I'm going to say positive. I'm way too early in the race to like actually be like super like pissed off. Cause there was really no reason for me to be pissed off. I was just kind of absorbing the race at that point, to be honest. And so got to an aid station though, and noticed that it was just like nobody was at the aid station. It was like one of those old school, like orange barrel, like Gatorade tubs with just cold ice water in it and 0-calorie vitamin water. And I talked about this on my Instagram, but I'm like, that immediately was like a sure sign of like, oh no, I signed up for a race that was like poorly put together. Oh no. And I didn't feel guilty about that. Like, that's clearly not my fault, like it's like I feel no responsibility or accountability for that necessarily. But I was just like, okay, I'm not sure how today is going to go. I think this is going to be a bit of like an emotional roller coaster. And went and saw the 0-calorie vitamin water. And the reason why that's such a big deal is because you're banking on these aid stations to have food and calories and electrolytes and necessary means to kind of get you through tough parts of the race. And for reference, like my other races, like Terrapin Mountain, for example, that race had like peanut butter and jelly and brownies and cookies and Coke and pretzels and chips and extra goo packets and electrolyte water and Gatorade and like pickles and like everything that you could ever imagine. And so that's kind of what I anticipated, especially because this race was so long, 50 miles. So I was like, oh no, 0-calorie vitamin water. This does not look very good. And I literally looked at the bottle because I was like, is there actually anything in there? And it literally was nothing. It was like literally 0 calories. And it was like flavoring and water. And I was like, this doesn't meet the need of any type of refueling or electrolytes. There's literally nothing in this. So I was like, okay, I need to keep moving. Like basically I cannot bank on them for the aid stations. I have to just keep within my own plan. Finished that 9-mile loop, and at the bottom of that 9-mile loop, it was not marked, and I took a wrong turn, and I ran about 2 extra miles, and I finally hit a major like freeway, to be honest, and I was like, I have no idea where I am. There's no signage here. I don't know what to do. And before the race started, the race organizer, the director, gave out his cell phone number. So I was like, okay, well, this is my only option. So I called the race director and he was like, yeah, you're off by like a pretty far margin. Like head back to where you came out of the wood line and like keep continuing. So went all the way back and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is already like a poop show. And made it back to the chapel. And that was when I had finished about 13 miles. Actually, it was 11 miles because even after I went back to the wood line where I was supposed to be, I still made another wrong turn. And I was like, okay, well, this is annoying. Got back to the chapel and very hot. And thankfully, it was so sweet. My husband went to a local Walmart and he got like an ice chest and he got one of those like ice rags. I literally would have died if I didn't have that thing. And he would like take the rag and like squish it onto my face, like cool my face off. I was so hot. At this point, my soft little feet skin, because I was a ding-a-ling in the morning, were like already starting to like move around and like blister a little bit. So I changed out my socks for dry socks, which was like a clutch move. So glad I had a second pair of socks. And honestly, at that point, we had a bit of a snafu because at the chapel, I sat down in my little camping chair, and my dog Scout, who's a very good guard dog, was like very much in my face, like she was just trying to like lick me and like be with me and like on me. She was very much trying to get my attention, and I'm trying to change my socks and blah blah blah. And these 2 little girls like ran up to us as I'm like trying to like keep my composure, and I'm trying to like change my socks, and my husband's trying to like ask me what I need, and he's trying to change out my bottles and take my trash and blah blah blah. And Scout ends up barking at these 2 little girls. I think because I came up and like grabbed her, and no excuse for my dog, obviously, but she definitely, I think, felt like a little boxed in, and she obviously was like very concerned with me in that moment. So that was kind of a snafu, and definitely my focus was immediately shifted to like trying to mend the conversation between like my dog barking at these little girls, and the mom at the time like picked up the little girl and was like, like, did she bite you? Like, trying to talk to the little girl. And I was like, oh no, oh, this is not good. Like, we're going to get freaking sued. That's immediately where my mind goes. And so then immediately I'm trying to like mend this conversation, all while being like super frustrated that I missed a couple turns, super frustrated that it was super hot, and just like it was too much to manage. And at this point I was like, okay, I need to just keep my head down. I need to keep working. So I ended up doing the lake loop again, the 4-mile lake loop. And then I went back out for the 9-mile. And that is when things started to go pretty south, because when I came back from that second loop, I had gotten a text message from my husband, and he said, hey, like, I don't know if this helps or not, but everybody else from the race besides you and one other guy like bailed from the race because everyone had kept missing turns because of the lack of organization, and there wasn't very good aid stations, and they didn't account for the heat. And so they maybe should have had an ice chest, and they should have had means to like cool off the runners, and they didn't. And so when I got back at around the halfway mark, about like 28-ish miles, I was very much faced with a super difficult decision of just being like, okay, do I bail out of the race? I've worked so hard for this. I'm so conflicted. Yeah, I'm frustrated, but I'm more annoyed that like I set myself up for such success today and it just wasn't coming to fruition. And so what ended up happening was the guy that stayed like running in the race was already out like on his third loop, I believe. And at that point I was so far behind from my missed turns that I was like doing math in my head, and I was like, I'm going to have to hit that part of that ridge line again at like 11 p.m. probably. Like again, probably at 6 p.m. and then again at like 11 p.m. And I was like, I just don't trust myself out there, especially with no like backup navigation and like no aid stations to count on and no like checkpoints that were good. It was just like kind of a hard decision. And so the race director came up to me and he was like, hey, I'm so sorry about like all the miscommunication. Like, what do you want to do? Like, what's your goal for today? And I said, well, my goal is to run 50 miles. And he's like, well, you're welcome to run like anywhere around the camp. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. Like, I'm glad you're being really kind to me, but I'm obviously disappointed that I have to ditch on the course because I'm just like annoyed with everything. So I ended up running the lake loop, I think like 3 or 4 more times, 4 more times, I think 4. And some of those were by myself, and some of those my husband hopped in on with me. And it was like so nice of him to hop in on. It was like such a good like mental moment for me to like be out there. And he brought the dog. And so I got to kind of like show him the parts that like were really pretty. And I always love being with my dog, out on the trail. So like that was really positive. Around like 30 to 35 miles, it definitely started to set in that like my feet were really starting to hurt. I think the pounding on my feet, like they felt like they were going to explode. And at that point I was like kind of like using an analogy as like, what's it called? Like Chinese waterboarding, not Chinese waterboarding. Yeah. When they talk about how they just drip like one drop at a time, and it's like not that big of a deal, but like after like 10 hours, like it feels like a nail is going through your forehead. That's kind of how I felt with my feet. I was like, this is not that big of a deal for like 30 miles, but 35 miles, man, my feet feel like they're going to explode. Like I'm running on nails. And so that kind of set in around 35 miles. And I would definitely say miles 35 to 45 were definitely the hardest on my legs for sure. My knees really started to feel like they were going to explode. But I definitely like kind of went back and forth on like, oh, I'm feeling really motivated. Yes, I'm going to do this. I'm so proud of myself. And then definitely moments where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to run 15 more miles. Like, obviously. And so I think my husband ended up running / walking, shuffling with me the last like 12 to 14 miles. And again, that was like so kind of him. I think I would have 1,000% bailed if he wasn't there. I'm going to be completely honest. I wish I was like strong enough to say that I would have just toughed it out on my own, and I would have had like the confidence and, the everything in order and had a clear mind and, my emotions set in stone to like continue. But having him as support there was definitely a major game changer. So I'm really, really grateful. And then I definitely started to feel like really emotional around miles like 42 to 48 for sure, because I'm gonna be real honest. I think the disappointment of the race really started to set in because it was like starting to be nighttime. It was like 10, 11 p.m. I was really reckoning with the idea that like I wasn't going to finish how I had hoped. And so that was like really coming to the forefront of my mind while also trying to balance like, hey, you are going to meet some sense of your goal. You are going to run 50 miles, like I was still so conflicted at that point. And so kind of got through 45 miles, and the last 5 miles were freaking brutal. I thought my feet were going to explode. And we hit around 48 miles. We hit like a weird like soccer field that was on the YMCA camp. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it either. I started crying my eyes out. I was like shuffling, and I was like, trying to walk jog. And I was just like bawling my eyes out because I was like and I was just so overwhelmed. I was so tired. It was like 1 a.m, which I'm like not a night owl at all. So that was like already kind of a vulnerability for me, which sounds stupid, but it's like totally the truth. And I was expecting to finish around 11 p.m. So when it's like 1 a.m, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much later than I thought. So yeah, the last 2 miles, I definitely felt more confident. I just kind of like switched my mindset over. I changed my music. That was another big thing I had talked about previously. Like when I'm trying to keep my composure in check, which I clearly didn't, I started crying at 48 miles because I was like not excited for myself. I was crying because I was like overwhelmed and in so much pain. So I definitely changed my music after that little hissy fit, and I put like my weight room music on, my more serious like rock music, workout music, which like it sounds so silly, but it really does have an effect on me and like how I feel confident in what I'm doing. So change my music to weight room music, hard rock music, which I love. And then that last like mile, I definitely started picking up the pace a little bit, and I just knew like I could suffer for another mile. And when I hit 50 miles on my watch, man, it was such a weird sensation because I was running till my watch told me 50 rather than like a finish line. And normally at like an ultra marathon finish line, like there's like a big blow up, archway, and there's music and people are cheering for you and there's cowbells and like, you get your picture and like there's a timer there, and there was a hooting and hollering and like people are so excited, and like you just feel like you absorb all of that excitement. You absorb like everyone being proud of you, and therefore that makes you kind of proud of yourself. Like it's hard to just do that solely like intrinsically. I wish I could do that, but I very much get excited when people are excited with me, not necessarily for me, but with me. Like I want people with me. And when my watch hit 50, it was just me and my husband out in the middle of nowhere, and it felt incredibly surreal. Like I had done it, I had finished it. I cried again, and then I just kind of hit a state of shock, and, my husband was taking pictures, and we kind of walked back to the chapel. And to be honest, the most shocking part, which sounds so silly, but the most shocking part was when I got back to the chapel, there was no one there. The guy that had done the race already finished and he had left. No race organizers were there. All of the aid stations were cleaned up. No tables, no food. Nobody was awake. It was dead in the middle of the night. Nobody there. And I was like, immediately, I was like, that is crazy. I kind of felt like betrayed a little bit because I was like, you fools put on such a bad race, and I just accomplished something I was so proud of, and you can't even like, they didn't owe me anything necessarily because I ditched their course. So I do recognize like they didn't feel like they had to stay up because like I ditched their race, really, but at the same time, like what a liability. Like that sounds kind of silly. I don't want to like be dramatic about it, but I was like, I could have croaked out there and no one was awake. And yet I was still running their race, like on their clock at their camp. It was such a weird dynamic. So, yeah, went back to my little station. I had a camp chair, Chad took a picture of me. I forgot to kind of hit on, I would say at the halfway mark, I had a double cheeseburger. I was going to hit on that. At the halfway mark around 28 miles, I did eat a cheeseburger. I was so hungry. And that was something I had been craving my entire training. Was like anytime I did a big run, like all I wanted was a McDonald's double cheeseburger. Like so salty, give me something savory. I was sick of like the sugary foods. I was sick of all the carbohydrates. And all I really wanted was just like like something salty. So, yeah, so ate a cheeseburger about the halfway mark. And then I had a piece of pizza. I had 2 pieces of pizza at mile 43. I had 7 miles left. I had 2 pieces of pizza, and that tasted like incredible. But when we got back and like the race was done, I got in the car and just like propped my feet up on the dash and like had Scout, my dog, with me, and my husband like cleaned up all of our stuff. We drove to the nearest hotel, checked in. I took a shower, like kind of hobbled around. I tossed and turned for like 4 hours in bed, like got terrible sleep, mainly because my body was like pumped full of caffeine and I was like pumped full of like sugar and carbs and like so much like inflammation going on because my knees were like killing me and my body was like in overdrive trying to like heal all of these things, And I woke up at like 6 a.m. starving. Like I hobbled down to the hotel breakfast and ate 4 breakfast omelets and like 3 of those little chocolate milks that are pumped full of high fructose corn syrup. I had 3 of those. I could have swore the people around me probably thought I was nuts because they were like, why is this girl hobbling around and why is she eating all of these like omelets and chocolate milks? Like that was just so bizarre. So that was kind of funny. And then, yeah, and then I had to take about 48 hours to kind of process everything because everyone was like excited for me on Instagram, but there's definitely some vulnerability in like sharing your experiences. And I felt like to some extent, people were kind of blaming me for like signing up for a bad race. Like I should have known better. But that's honestly just kind of like an ignorant perspective on their part because that's kind of what I've concluded is like it's a bit of an ignorant perspective on like the person watching my Instagram stories part because they don't they how would I have known? Like I don't need to dive down that. But I was just like a little bit frustrated with that. And there was a sense of like with people wanting to be excited with me, like they want to hurt with me when I'm frustrated as well. And so people were frustrated with me about how poorly the race was, but I was also managing like, but I did it. But I did. I ran 50 miles and arguably it was harder, you know? And so then I was faced with like, well, maybe I shouldn't have even shared how difficult it was because I don't want people to be downers. So you just like toss back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Like I shouldn't have shared this. Like, why would I share that? Like, but then it's not authentic, but then you got to be authentic. And like, honestly, I just like social media because it's fun and I want it to be fun. And so I don't love sharing like those hard parts, but that's kind of part of the podcast. And that's part of like what I've tried to do this past like start of the year is like, I've had several people tell me like, I've got to be more of a storyteller. Like I've got to tell like the harder parts. Like I can't just be like fun, happy Kels. Like I succeeded everything. Like, and that's not me being prideful. I think it's just me being like, that's just what I share. Like I just share the fun stuff and I share the good stuff, but I don't share any of the tough stuff. But that's what people really are going to connect with is kind of like the tougher parts of all these experiences. And so I did share that. And then I felt like sometimes my audience was betraying me. And so that was kind of like a tough thing to kind of work through. But ultimately, like I'm so proud of myself. And I was faced with really hard, difficult challenges. And once I talked with George, my running coach, he was like, Kels, you know, we're not racing here. It was for completion. You did do it. You checked the box. You accomplished what you wanted. And ultimately, what you've been saying is like you want to establish more margin in your life. You want to make trail running and camping and hiking more regular in your life. You want to be more confident out on a trail by yourself. You accomplished all of those things. And it was just because like growing up running track and field, like I was always in control of all of the details. I controlled my socks, my shoes, my fueling, my shorts, my chafing, my sports bra, like how I warmed up, when I warmed up, excuse me, all of those different things. And so that's where I felt like pretty disappointed with the race situation. And he was like, sometimes you're going to sign up for a race and like things are going to be out of your control, and you're going to have to manage that. And so just kind of like absorb that as is, but like be super proud of yourself. Like this is not a loss. Like you don't have you don't have anything to redeem. And so that was really good for me to hear and process. And I think that experience will always stick with me. And to be honest, can I see myself doing it again? Absolutely. I mean, I can 1,000% see myself doing another 50. And honestly, in the next like 10 years, I can certainly see myself doing a 100-mile race for sure. I think out of all of the races I've done, I enjoyed this training the most. And I think it's because I just kind of absorbed it and I just made it not in like a negative way, but I kind of made it my identity. I was like, no, I am capable. I am a runner. Like I'm capable of being an ultra marathoner. I am capable of being a hiker and like being like a hippy dippy crunchy runner. Like if that's what I want to do, that's what I want to do and I can do it. And so I think I just kind of absorbed all of that and I thoroughly enjoyed the training for the most part. It was definitely hard, but definitely enjoyed it. Yeah, I think I consumed probably 4 to 5,000 calories the day of the race. And another fun fact was I gained 9 pounds from the race, just in fluid and in electrolytes for fluid retention. So that was super interesting. And then within like 3 days, I lost all those 9 pounds. So it was clearly water weight, which was not something I was concerned with necessarily. But it's just kind of like a fun fact, like how much your weight can truly fluctuate based on like your fluid levels and the type of like running or exercise that you're doing. So yeah. Okay. I'm done talking. I'm going to go eat dinner. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to start talking to you guys about my next training goal, which I'm very excited about. I'm very nervous. I'm kind of already in the thick of the training. But I'm pumped and it's definitely a point for me to get better at. So look out for that podcast. Thanks for being here. And I appreciate all of your guys' support. And shout out to my friend Ali Salafia. I know you listen to my podcast. I love you very much. And we'll talk soon. Bye.